Before power was measured in market share, it was measured in territory. Let's review the ultimate strategists. The puzzle is how command survives distance when the center cannot see each decision. Distance is an organizational force, not merely geography. Authority becomes fragile when too many judgments must travel upward. Delay accumulates, local knowledge fades, and the center becomes responsible for choices it cannot fully observe. That delay changes both timing and available options. Delegation seems like the obvious answer, yet delegation creates a second danger. Speed improves, but interpretation begins to vary across regions, units, and layers of command. Variation can spread before the center even detects it. The central question is therefore not whether leaders should centralize or delegate. It is how a system can preserve direction while allowing decisions to move. The balance must be designed rather than personally improvised. Now imagine a wide command network facing changing conditions. Many local decisions carry consequences, but waiting for approval can be as damaging as acting poorly. Pressure exposes boundaries that calm periods leave invisible. This episode examines a structural answer. Define narrow decision domains clearly, then pair them with broad principles that guide judgment inside those boundaries. The emphasis is architecture, not admiration of command. The first failure appears when the center tries to own most meaningful choices. The organization may look controlled, yet its decision queue quietly becomes a bottleneck. Apparent control can conceal a growing coordination debt. Small uncertainties rise upward beside major crises. Senior authority spends attention on matters that could have been resolved locally, while urgent decisions wait behind routine ones. Attention becomes the scarce resource behind the formal hierarchy. Centralization can also erase context. Information becomes compressed as it moves through layers, so the final decision may be consistent with policy but detached from conditions. Consistency then becomes detached from usefulness. Study the architecture of command. A command system is not strong merely because instructions are clear. It is strong when responsibility matches the information available. That alignment between knowledge and responsibility is the central test. Pure delegation creates the opposite weakness. Local actors move quickly, but boundaries blur, standards drift, and separate decisions may pull the larger system in conflicting directions. Local efficiency can still create system-wide incoherence. The problem is not disobedience alone. Two loyal subordinates can produce incompatible outcomes when each interprets an undefined mandate through different assumptions. Good intentions cannot repair an undefined mandate. To understand the balance, separate authority from judgment. Authority answers who may decide. Judgment answers how that person should reason when conditions are uncertain. Confusing them produces either paralysis or uncontrolled discretion. A system can grant authority narrowly while supporting judgment broadly. One level may control timing, another allocation, and another escalation, each within explicit limits. Each layer requires a distinct and visible operating space. Decision domains are therefore more useful than vague empowerment. They define the category, scale, and consequence of choices that belong at each level. This makes freedom operational rather than rhetorical. Within that context, escalation is not a sign of weakness. It is a designed boundary that identifies when a local decision exceeds its permitted exposure. A boundary works only when everyone recognizes it beforehand. Broad frameworks serve a different purpose. They do not dictate each action in advance. They clarify priorities, acceptable trade-offs, and the outcomes the system is trying to protect. They offer direction while preserving room for contextual judgment. When domains and frameworks work together, local speed can increase without severing strategic alignment. The subordinate knows both where freedom begins and where it ends. Alignment becomes a property of the system, not personal closeness. This arrangement also changes accountability. A decision can be evaluated against its assigned domain and guiding principles rather than against whether the center personally approved it. Review can then focus on process, boundaries, and reasoning. The distinction matters because accountability without defined authority becomes punishment after the fact. Defined domains make responsibility visible before the decision is made. Otherwise, accountability becomes retrospective control disguised as governance. The first design task is identifying recurring decision categories: routine, reversible, and locally informed choices usually require a different authority path than rare, difficult to reverse system-wide choices. This classification prevents too many decisions from entering one queue. The second task is setting thresholds. A local decision may remain local until its cost, duration, uncertainty, or cross-unit impact passes an agreed boundary. Thresholds convert vague caution into an observable trigger. The third task is creating a shared reasoning framework. Without one, delegated decisions become isolated preferences rather than coordinated expressions of the same strategy. Shared reasoning keeps separate choices pointed toward one purpose. Frameworks are strongest when they rank priorities. Under pressure, people need to know which objective should yield when speed, resources, safety, and consistency cannot be maximized together. Priority order becomes especially important when objectives collide. The fourth task is preserving feedback. Local decisions must travel back into the system so the center can revise boundaries, update priorities, and detect repeated friction. Feedback turns local experience into institutional learning. Authority moves through institutions. A useful delegation system is not a one-time transfer. It is a continuous loop of permission, action, review, and adjustment. Without review, delegation slowly hardens into disconnected autonomy. The fifth task is designing exception paths. Unusual situations should have a route upward that is fast enough to help and narrow enough to avoid rebuilding the bottleneck. Good exceptions remain exceptional instead of swallowing the design. Exception paths also protect local actors from guessing beyond their mandate. They can move decisively inside the domain while recognizing when the decision belongs elsewhere. That recognition is itself part of competent judgment. The sixth task is separating outcome quality from decision quality. A sound decision can produce a poor result, while a reckless decision can occasionally succeed. Results alone cannot reveal whether the process was disciplined. Evaluation should therefore ask whether the actor used the available information, respected the domain, followed the framework, and escalated when the boundary was crossed. This creates standards that are firm without becoming mechanically punitive. That distinction supports learning. If each unfavorable result is treated as disobedience, local judgment will collapse into defensive approval seeking. Fear then teaches concealment rather than better reasoning. Conversely, if each result is excused as initiative, delegation loses discipline. The system needs room for judgment and consequences for violating clearly assigned boundaries. Both extremes destroy the learning that delegation requires. The seventh task is matching authority with resources. A subordinate cannot be responsible for an outcome while lacking the time, information, personnel, or material capacity to influence it. Authority without capacity is an empty assignment. The eighth task is preventing hidden overlap. When two levels believe they own the same decision, conflict and delay appear even when both are competent. Clear ownership prevents competence from turning into jurisdictional rivalry. The ninth task is maintaining coherence across domains. Separate authorities still need shared definitions, compatible incentives, and a common understanding of the larger objective. Coherence must be maintained across delegated boundaries. A reasonable counterpoint is that some situations demand concentrated command. When consequences are tightly coupled, fragmented decisions can create cascading harm. The right level can change with the coupling of consequences. That exception does not eliminate delegation. It changes the boundary by moving a specific decision domain upward while leaving unrelated local choices in place. This preserves local movement while protecting shared exposure. Another limitation is that broad principles can be interpreted differently. Shared language does not guarantee shared judgment, especially when incentives or local pressures diverge. Misaligned incentives can bend identical principles in opposite directions. Within that context, training, review, and repeated calibration matter. The framework becomes useful only when participants practice applying it to ambiguous situations. Calibration converts abstract principles into repeatable judgment. A conceptual test helps. Suppose two local units face similar pressure but different constraints. Identical orders may fail, while aligned principles allow different actions toward one objective. Difference in action can coexist with unity of purpose. The opposite case is also revealing. If local differences are minor but each unit chooses a separate standard, the system may lose compatibility and collective direction. Uniformity does not necessarily create alignment. and variety does not necessarily create disorder. The boundary is therefore conditional. Centralized decisions whose consequences are tightly interconnected. Delegate decisions whose information is local and whose effects remain contained. The decision boundary should follow consequence, knowledge, and reversibility. The opening puzzle can now be answered. Authority survives distance when the system distributes decisions according to where knowledge exists and where consequences are carried. Presence is replaced by designed relationships among roles. The solution is not maximum freedom or maximum control. It is a deliberate match between decision scope, information quality, consequence scale, and review. Control and freedom become variables rather than opposing doctrines. Narrow domains reduce ambiguity. Broad frameworks preserve strategic direction. Escalation handles exceptions. Feedback adjusts the design when reality exposes a weak boundary. Each element corrects a different failure mode. Together, these elements turn delegation from a personality-based trust exercise into an institutional method for moving judgment through a complex system. Durability appears when coordination survives individual absence. Strategy outlives rulers. A capable center is useful, but a durable command system must continue making coherent decisions when the center is absent, delayed, or replaced. Personal brilliance can therefore produce institutional dependence. This also explains why highly capable leaders can create weak organizations. When too many answers depend on one mind, competence at the center may conceal fragility across the wider institution. Legibility makes distributed judgment governable. A stronger design makes local judgment legible. The center can see why decisions were made, which boundary applied, and where the framework produced confusion. Correction becomes targeted instead of becoming a total recentralization. So, that visibility allows correction without reclaiming most decisions. The system can refine one domain, one threshold, or one principle instead of abandoning delegation as a whole. That question forces authority into operational terms. The practical question is not how much authority should be delegated. It is, which decisions belong where, under what limits, and with what path for review. Repeated weighting is often evidence of a misplaced boundary. Begin by identifying decisions that repeatedly wait for approval despite relying mainly on local information. Those are candidates for a clearer local domain. Repeated spillover is evidence that the boundary is too low. Then identify decisions that repeatedly create cross-unit consequences. Those may require a shared standard, a higher threshold, or coordinated authority. Capacity is part of authority, not a separate administrative concern. Ask whether each accountable role possesses matching resources and information. Responsibility that exceeds capacity creates blame, not effective delegation. Escalation must preserve urgency and useful context. Examine the escalation path. A boundary is useful only when crossing it leads to timely support rather than silence, confusion, or automatic rejection. Analogy requires restraint because surface similarity can conceal deep difference. The final application must remain bounded. Historical command systems and modern organizations operate under different conditions, incentives, rights, and technologies. The answer reveals whether delegation is designed or merely tolerated. Still, the leadership question travels across contexts. Does authority move through a designed institution, or do difficult decisions repeatedly return to one person? Efficiency cannot erase questions of justice and consequence. Effectiveness is not legitimacy. A system can distribute decisions efficiently while remaining unjust, coercive, or harmful. So structural competence does not settle the moral question. Structural analysis should widen moral attention, not narrow it. Use this framework to inspect architecture rather than admire command. Look for domains, thresholds, principles, resources, escalation, feedback, and the human consequences surrounding them. The question tests resilience rather than theatrical control. The durable lesson is a question. Can the system make aligned decisions at distance without turning local judgment into either obedience or improvisation? The throne changes, the strategy remains. Until next time.